Hello and welcome to my studio. It's Vin Jelly here doing flower painting today as one of a series I've been working on recently, and trying to approach them all in a slightly different way so I can learn a lot from the process. So this one's drawn out fairly tightly, and what I'm doing here is working through the blooms, working on the foliage behind and trying to get that more established than I've done in the previous paintings, working through and in between sort of the negative painting areas, trying to resolve them a bit more thoroughly so that they're not too random. This is a bit of a tighter piece. As you can see, if you look carefully, I've kind of drawn out the bouquet fairly tightly to give myself a good guideline, set of guidelines as to where the painting will go. And then I can really concentrate on working small part at a time and building up the painting gradually like that. It's quite tricky. The photograph I'm working from hasn't got a lot of light in it. It's a beautiful bouquet and I quite like the arrangement, and yet there's not a lot of light on it, which makes the form quite difficult to describe. But it's a very pleasant arrangement of flowers and colours, and so I'm kind of working on that and relying on the beauty of it to hold the piece together. And later on, when I start applying the more abstract passages around the edge, that breaks up the harsh realist areas and softens things, and I quite like that. I quite like that effect. So whilst it looks quite tight in the video, it's not uber tight. It's fairly reasonably tight, but it's not one of these botanical studies where you painstakingly draw each pore on each petal or each fold, tiny little details like that. There is quite a lot of detail in it, but it's still quite freely painted. So I'm using a lot of wet on wet in small controlled areas. So here you can see I'm working on one of the orange blooms in the back there, and you can see how I'll apply a bit of liquid paint and then sort of work next to that. Then when I've got part of the larger area, as you can see, I've just filled in now, I can drop slightly different colours into that and allow them to blend and to mix on the page, and that's quite a nice way of varying the colours and making the actual paintwork more interesting, softening some of the edges within the actual overall shape, and just allowing the watercolour to do its thing, which it does so beautifully when it's controlled. And I quite like this way of working at the moment. It's something I'm experimenting with and trying to get a handle on, and it allows you to keep the colours very clean within a certain area as well. You're working onto the white of the paper, and so there's no colours coming through other than the ones that you're working on keeping alive. I may go back and add a few little areas later on, and if I do that, then I'll wet it again so that it's alive. But the secret is not to overwork any of these areas. So the series I'm working on at the moment of these flower pieces, I've already posted a few videos already, which some of you may have seen, and the theme's continuing, but as I said at the beginning, I'm trying to break things up and approach each painting slightly differently. They'll all relate to each other. They'll all have some of the lovely effects of watercolour and sprinkled salt and wet in wet mixing, but I'm trying to find a happy medium. I think that the reference shot really does make a difference to one's painting, so you have to choose very carefully, and at the moment with the lockdown having been in place, and still a lot of businesses aren't up and running, it's not very easy to get hold of the kind of reference material that I would like. and so I'm having to rely on photography. I'd like to do a big shout out to Julia at Fairfield Flowers, who's supplied me with quite a bit of reference. She grows her own beautiful flowers and bouquets and supplies them to local businesses and sells them locally near Salisbury. And I'm in Devon, but we've known each other for quite a long time. So thanks for that, Julia. Keep up the good work. So now I'm working on one of the blooms, which is sticking out at the side, and I decided I'd soften that a bit later because it was out on a limb a little bit and taking away the focal viewpoint slightly from the centre. Under my hand there you can see the speckled effect created by some salt on some of the darker areas at the bottom there, and I'll gradually work on that and add salt as we go, because that's giving me quite a nice speckled effect and breaking up some of those larger flat areas of paint, or some of the washes at least. I've put a lot of them on quite delicately, adding fairly pastel colours around the edge to almost give a sense of aerial perspective, even though you wouldn't have it on such a small depth of field as we've got here. But it quite helps the eye to move around and give some variety to the overall feel of the painting. So a lot of the main areas are completed now, and I'm just sort of working on peripheral flowers and details that need to just help pull things together. It's now a question of pulling and pushing and trying not to overwork anything, trying to keep things fresh yet balanced and give as much form as I possibly can to the piece. And it does have a certain flatness about it and a certain perhaps illustrative design sense, rather than a painting with lots of depth in it, as a landscape or a full lit still life might have. But I think it makes an interesting visual arrangement, and certainly enjoyable to paint. I had some great fun experimenting, and as you can see I'm working on just strengthening up some of the colour washes on the side there, sprinkling some salt on to give it subtle effects. And here I'm taking off the tape, but there are still one or two little things to do, such as softening that bloom on the left there. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and if you'd like to put any comments down below, I'll answer them if it's applicable. See you on the next, folks.